as and particularly me, as Mark's already highlighted, once I hit the go button, I forget that there's a stop button as well. So please interrupt me at any stage. I will not be offended. I'll be almost relieved to have someone else come in and join us as well. So I guess the key thing I would pick up on, Mark, just in reference to, as you said, where we got to in the last conversation and kind of where we got to now, was this concept of consciousness. And Corey, I think that quote you kind of reminds us all, the smell of the place, is a really, really lovely segue into that, because if you imagine being unconscious, right? So you fainted or you passed out or you banged your head and you lost consciousness, then what you're aware of is incredibly limited, right? It's like your sensory experience completely shuts down. And the smell of the place only starts to occur when consciousness starts to reorientate or recalibrate itself as you start to come round. And in fact, I think one of the first aid responses you give to somebody that's passed away is sometimes give them smelling salts, isn't it? To re-stimulate and reboot the whole system. So this concept of consciousness, I think, is the elusive obvious of organization and even human experience. And when I say elusive obvious, what I mean by that is we're all conscious right now. We're all kind of engaged, awake, listening, processing, maybe warm or cold, depending on where you're sitting. Maybe you've got background noises in. I've got a coffee next to me that I sate myself with occasionally. So we're having these stationary and sensational experiences constantly going on. But that's kind of only possible because we are conscious. And the sort of the less conscious we are, the less that faculty and those faculties are available for interaction and experience. So I believe that this is kind of a new dawning, if you like, of inquiry and consideration for organizations to pay attention to, especially with the radical advancements of artificial intelligence turning up. And even within the last week, I've just seen kind of the next iteration of what that looks like in terms of swarms and artificial employees, for example, operating in swarms. Just so 90 days ago, that didn't even exist as a thing. It was just a hypothesis, and now it's actually just gone live to market within 90 days. So what kind of plays out for me as an anthropologist is almost, well, this is getting exciting. If we've got intelligence on a hockey curve growth for advancement or evolvement or evolution, as we're seeing in artificial intelligence, it kind of raises the question for me, well, who becomes conscious first, human beings or artificial intelligence? So depending on where you sit in the artificial intelligence, and I'm not an expert at all in that, there's a massive sort of almost moral debate going on around the world of what happens if artificial intelligence becomes conscious, and is that even possible? Can it become conscious, or can it mimic consciousness? So what I'm particularly interested in is just conversations at the moment kind of going, well, okay, what's the counterbalance to that? And of course, it's humanity. So how conscious are we? How do we evaluate how conscious we are? How do we understand whether the level of consciousness that we're sort of operating through and as is relevant for the change and the pace of change and maybe the uncertainty of the world that we're all living at the moment. So that consciousness, if you like, is almost the vehicle for making sensations possible, and the ability to process sensations and maybe even make sense out of sensations. So I just see that as kind of almost like the invisible, maybe even ignored element of businesses around the world. For the last 400 years, we've just kind of mastered this ability to get very, very good at structure, process systems, financing, asset management, all that wonderful stuff. And I just wonder whether there's a tipping point that's just arrived where we've now kind of mastered that to the extent we've just got to now turn around and do what we call, in anthropology, we call it reverse lens, where you turn around and now have a look at yourself in relation to what you've just created, when you look at yourself in relation to the world condition, when you look at yourself in relation to people you're leading or customers you're serving. So Mike, pause there and just
humdinger already there, Michael. So you mentioned being unconscious and then becoming conscious. I remember Nick Petrie wrote a paper called Wake Up, literally because so many of us coping with the complexity and the amount of information in the world are kind of in a trance, just navigating through on patterns and behaviors that allow us to simplify the world and therefore get on. So how even conscious are we, let alone intentional with our attention?
Yeah, this is going to sound a little provocative, and there's a long, long, long backstory to how I got to this kind of viewpoint, which we probably don't have time for. I'll try and do it some justice, and maybe point you in the right direction if you want to go off and do. But bluntly, not that conscious. So it's kind of on a scale of 1 to 10. If 10 was the ultimate level of consciousness that a human being could possibly experience, we're kind of hovering around a 2 out of 10, which in and of itself is actually incredible progress over the time that we've been kind of on the planet, because there's so many things that stand in the way of that being even possible, that even to got 2 is actually something we could kind of almost celebrate to a certain extent, but it's very fragile. My brother is a high performance psychologist working in London and specializes in hypnotherapy. And he's constantly quoting Carl Gustav Jung, the eminent psychiatrist from last century, who had this wonderful quote that said, until we as human beings make our subconscious conscious, it'll run our whole lives, but we'll call it fate. And so what he's describing there is we're largely unconscious. We act out of unconscious because of suppressed emotions and suppressed memories, suppressed feelings. We are uncomfortable with those, so we deny they even exist. That's how far we've suppressed them and deny them. But of course, they're still active in our neurology, and therefore we end up projecting them onto the people and environments around us. And so then once we do that, that environment responds back. And that's what Jung's talking about, is you start to see it as fate, as I was lucky or unlucky. And what Carl Gustav Jung said, yeah, you might want to have a closer look at that, because it's actually the level of awareness you have around that determines whether it's actually you're seeing it as luck or whether you're seeing it as something that you're accountable for and have agency around. So my experience, Mark, is not that aware. And one of our greatest assets as a species is our intelligence. It's kind of separated us from some of the other species on the planets in such a remarkable way. I almost sense now, maybe more than any other time since, well, maybe with the exception of World War II, and I was kind of really contemplating this last year when the movie Oppenheimer came out, and how we were doing experiments on nuclear activity without actually knowing whether that was going to set off a chain reaction across the whole universe and explode the whole universe, and we went ahead and did it anyway. So you're kind of going, that's what I'm talking about. Got the intelligence, but don't necessarily have the awareness or the self-awareness or the system awareness to actually be safe in our own experimentation and expression.
Love that. We have a framework that we share and utilize with clients called B3 that references some of those steps for that very reason. Be conscious being the first step, like wake up, notice what's going on. Be curious as the second, so open your mind to what else is there, and then be better, take an action, do something, be an inquiry going forwards. So thinking of consciousness, if we're at 2 out of 10, just wondering how might one lift that? Because as we become more conscious beings, we can become more intentional, not only in ourselves, but in how we play well with others, which I believe could lift culture, but we'll get into culture definitions in a moment. So yeah, how might we lift consciousness? What stops us from becoming more awake from your experience, Michael?
I think the most important thing is self-awareness. So the starting place of even being aware that you're conscious is self-awareness. And we're going to kind of play with words a little bit here, just hopefully as a useful tool. So it's being aware of what are we referencing when we use that term self. So when you refer to I had coffee this morning. I have a great day ahead of me. I didn't sleep well that last night. I'm looking forward to spring, right? So this reference to I is the starting point of consciousness is actually just, and this has been around for thousands and thousands of years. So the ancient mystics, some of the earliest scriptures on the planet, some of the earlier, and by scriptures, I don't mean religious texts, I mean scripts on the planet were written to capture this as a inquiry, because it was identified even 5,500, 6,000 years ago. If we don't understand this, if we're not paying attention to this, then we're down at that 2 or below level of awareness. So the knowledge has been around for quite some time. So how do you do that? So I think you start with self-awareness. So it's just an inquiry into when I'm experiencing being, the sensation of I, which we all have right now. Right now, you're experiencing you, that experience of being you, sitting on a chair, listening or not listening, warm or not warm. So you've got an experience going right. So it's almost just coming back to that and centering yourself in that and just kind of going, what is that? Not who is that, what is that? And I get that's deliberately vague and that's done deliberately. All the great teachings kind of almost don't give you the answer. They sort of point in the direction of where the answer might be. So it's a little bit Zen. But I'd suggest to you that that's almost the starting place, is that's where being aware of consciousness has to begin with you being aware you are conscious yourself, whatever self is for you as an experience right now. Beyond that, there's just truckloads of evidence available on this around intention and will. So if you think about what you're doing in any moment, washing the dishes, walking the dog, answering an email, serving a client, parenting, if you can connect that sense of I with the intention. So what is my intention in this interaction? Is it to be present for them? Is it to be selfish for me? Is it to shift the dial in some way? Or is it to inquire, what is the dial? Is there a dial? So this stuff is really, really subtle. And again, my experience with organizations is it's something that organizations traditionally have not had to be good at, because of kind of the Industrial Revolution and everything that, the 3 revolutions that have gone on since then as well. We've been so caught up in the material aspects of business that the subtle underlying substructure of awareness and consciousness, just we haven't needed to pay attention to it at all, because it didn't obviously influence outcome or success. And I think since COVID, so many of us were in lockdown in such huge numbers around the world. I think that was this is going to sound like an awful thing, there was almost a bit of a blessing in disguise to that, or a silver lining to all the immense suffering. And I realized people literally lost their lives during that. So I'm not saying this lightly, but the flip side of it was almost a self inquiry opportunity, where you literally had to isolate and confront yourself a little bit, maybe in ways that some of us have never had to have done in our whole lifetime before. So intention's important. And out of that, then it becomes really, really simple, because then you start to focus on all the great traditions that you're all familiar with, which is kindness, caring, sharing, empathy, compassion, inquiry. And by inquiry, I mean curious rather than condemning. So all these amazing human traits are all stepping stones and pointings to a raising consciousness. So in other words, if you're inquiring, if you're kind, if you're caring, your neuronet literally rewires. So you're tapping into different neuro pathways, you're releasing different chemicals. So you're releasing oxytocin instead of adrenaline. That changes the experience you're having, which changes the vocabulary that you draw on, which changes the body language that you express, which changes the experience you're having and the people around you are having. And so you end up in this lovely symbiotic recalibration of what we are in that moment. So I get that all sounds a little kind of hypothetical and theoretical, but that's where I'm at with it all at the moment.
Michael, I think this is absolutely fascinating. My question is around, to what degree, like what role does leadership play in that? Is this something, right? Is this an individual intention? Is this something that we focus on individually, or how can we as leaders and those interested in further developing leadership in those that we work with, what role can leadership play in that?
Wow, what a question. Thank you. I'm going to stumble my way through this, Corey, so I don't have a well thought, certainly well argued kind of response to your question. And again, I'd love, if you don't mind, if we can use this opportunity, I'm happy to kick it off, but I'd love people to contribute, because I'm at I guess it's just even a stage in my life now, and certainly in my career, where leadership doesn't mean what it used to mean to me, or doesn't mean what organizations tell me it means anymore. So I think leadership for me is self-inquiry. And if I'm kind of a little bit corny with that, what I basically mean is the only person you can possibly lead is yourself. And even to do that, you need to understand, when you refer to self, what are you referring to? So that's a really, really deep kind of self-inquiry. I think that leadership inside organizations often gets attributed to status or function or role or responsibility or mandate. And so a lot of that is system, process, and maybe even politics rather than leadership. So in anthropology, leadership only occurs in reference to leading other human beings, right? So it's not about leading a process. It's not about leading a business. It's about, when we talk about leadership, it's going literally almost reverse lensing and going, who is following the example you were setting of being you? And if people are following that because they feel that there's something meritorious about you, or motivating about you, or about meaningful about how you conduct yourself with others, and they kind of go, oh, kind of, I like what Corey's doing. I like the way she shows up. I like the language she uses. I like the presence she has with others. And so they gravitate to that. That in anthropology, that's leadership. So in other words, leadership is almost just mirroring back to, hey, have you considered, and it's not that you're doing it deliberately, you're actually doing it for yourself, but you're kind of reflecting back to others. There's this way of being human. What do you think? There's this way of being human. What does that say to you? What does that invite in you? What potential do you see in this example that I happen to be exhibiting? Not to impress you or to win favor or to create fellowship, but sort of in response to. So for me, yeah, leadership increasingly so is very much around self-inquiry, and only self can do that for self. It's, you know, there's others that can support you and provide information and guidance and tips and experience, and you can absorb that. But ultimately, leadership for me is you only lead yourself. And if that's going well, depending on what well means in the context of the culture, or the maybe even the vertical level that you're kind of operating at, then people will resonate and respond around that. There's some great work on this, if anybody's interested, on attractive fields by Rupert Sheldrake, who has written probably 12 books on morphogenic fields. So it's kind of like a resonance when you sort of tap the tuning fork and you resonate in a particular way, and that sort of brings people to you. Patrick, I see you've got your hand patiently up there. I'd love to stop me talking and hand over to you if you don't mind.
Well, a long time ago, I heard two people, I can't remember which one it was, Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner, ask a bunch of coaches, what is the single best way to tell someone's a leader? And of course, there were about 150 of us there. No one, self included, had the courage to speak up and answer the question. So he recognized the reticence, and he said, oh, they have followers. So people follow them. So that's in sync with, if you look at it, what you're saying, just coming at it from the other direction. So it's like, and like you were saying to Corey, it's like, well, if you conduct yourself in a way and you offer thoughts in a way, and if you provide a compelling case for X, then I might be interested and I might want to play and I might want to follow you. So that makes a lot of sense from just what you're saying. It's just coming at it from another direction.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And there's kind of some almost anthropological, archaeological evidence for that as well, in that in many respects, our species is just intelligent animals. And so leadership occurred before kind of cognitive thought did, right? Because we can see it in the animal kingdom where you have the alpha female in the pack, or the alpha male. And so you're right, there's definitely some evidence there that there's a fellowship that kicks in even before we have logic or language. Or, when I say language, I mean verbal language, that human beings, obviously animals, have tonal language and body language and scent language and all sorts of other miraculous stuff. So yeah, I'm sort of with you, and thank you for contributing, Patrick. It is a bit of a, what do we mean by leadership? And I also get you could go to university and kind of contemplate that for 4 years and come out none the wiser as well. So hence when Corey posed the question, I went, this is going to be a clumsy response, but kind of here's where I've got to on it.
There's also evidence, if I just add one more thing,
Please.
For animals like deer, that they actually pass through their DNA what is safe and not safe in their environments. So that when there are hunters available in a certain area, even though this is the next generation, the deer know not to enter that area. So there's some kind of learning that's passed on, which to me that would exemplify leadership for a deer, which is laying the ground for the progeny not entering into dangerous territory.
Wonderful example, Patrick. Again, if you're interested in that, please go and check out Rupert Sheldrake. He even talks about, and I'm sure you've all seen this in nature, where you get a school of fish or a flock of birds or a herd of bison, and they kind of all change direction simultaneously. Originally, before we kind of had the technology to map that effectively, that was assumed to be some sort of form of very, very rapid communication, where, you know, the alpha bird on the right side of the flock of birds said, we're going this way, and everyone passed, like Chinese whispered past that across the flock, so that they all kind of moved. What they're finding now, because they've got high definition microwave technology to monitor it, is that the birds on both ends of the flock actually turn simultaneously, right? Which is, if you look at that from a cultural point of view, that's fascinating, right? When you kind of go, hang on a minute, there's a resonance going on that's non-verbal, which means it's non-linear. So that again sort of starts to point back to, there's a consciousness at play here that is actually operating before we even have thought and before we communicate thought to each other. There's already something that's kind of exhibited itself and provided itself. So I'm kind of, yeah, really captured by that, really kind of curious about that, and done a lot of, particularly over the last 20 years, I was sort of made aware of it in my early days in anthropology. It was just one of the many things in anthropology you're a little bit blown away at as an undergraduate. Go, what? That's incredible. Didn't think anything more of it. And then about 20 years later, I went, hang on a minute, that's too big to ignore. There's something going on there that I really want to explore and unpack. So yeah, it's really caught my attention. Jamie.
Yeah, Jamie, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to note, I think the conversation's gone in the direction of an earlier question from Darren, which sort of piqued my curiosity. Darren asked, does group consciousness depend on the consciousness of all members or the facilitation of the more conscious? And it sounds like you're starting to unpack that. I feel like it's one of those questions that might be unknowable for us at the moment, but I just wanted to note that.
Thank you, Jamie. And Darren, I apologize. I haven't got the chat open because I'd much rather watch people's faces than read, because it distracts me. So I apologize if I even missed. What a question. Such a great question. My understanding, and I put myself very much in the student box here, so understanding as a student rather than understanding as a teacher on this, is that group consciousness almost pre-exists as a energy field before the members of that group are participating in it. So it's almost like, imagine you're a musician. Classical music exists before you've even realized there's such a thing called classical music, because you've been, grown up playing on your guitar, playing reggae or blues. and suddenly you hear a piece of classical music and you go, oh, that sounds different, I like that. And so now you kind of join the conversation. What happens is that the individual arrives with a subjective experience of consciousness, participates in a pre-existing field of consciousness, and then there's a bit of a dance that occurs where there might be a minute reggae influence into classical music, and there might be a significant classical music influence into reggae. And so suddenly Bob Marley's bringing Beethoven chords into one of his songs, and the marketplace goes, whoa, that's different, I love that. And so the field broadens and more people choose to join. And then there's purists, both in the classical and the reggae section, that just go, what are you doing to my precious reggae? You can't mix that with Beethoven, I'm out of here. I thought you guys were all idiots, and now you've just proven it. So my experience of it is it's incredibly subjective, which, again, if we keep bringing it back to organizational structure, I don't, and this is purely my exposure, I don't believe organizations have taken subjectivity seriously yet. I think they've toyed around with it. I think they play with it. I think they maybe even don't understand it, and therefore they're bringing objectivity to a subjective conversation, and actually those tools don't work in that environment. And so I think my scenario is, and I hate doing sort of predictions, but my scenario, and just watching trends play out at the moment, my scenario is that within the very, very near future, by which I mean over the next 2 to 3 years, I think you could see organizations having to absolutely confront that dilemma of objectivity and subjectivity, and suddenly realizing one isn't right and the other's wrong, isn't significant and the other is insignificant. They're in a symbiotic relationship. And to your point, Darren, the more we actually appreciate and understand that, the more agency we provide, the more value we can add, the more service we can provide, and the more compassion we can bring to interaction with each other, because you suddenly realize I can objectively evaluate another person through my filters, but I can't subjectively understand them through theirs. So just, if you think about that just from customer service alone, it changes the game completely.
It's brought me into thinking a little bit about those fields of attraction, cultures as almost like a magnet, and how much of a shift there appeared to be through COVID, kind of where subjective and objective ended up morphing a bit more, was people going, life's really hard. If I'm going to show up to an organization, I want it to be one that has purpose. Purpose really matters to me now, and connection. And so cultures were more explicitly referencing their purpose as kind of an attraction mechanism to bring in talent. But I'm interested, as we move into that world of culture, what's your thinking around that magnetism and the energetic approach with cultures, and how you might create that, again, from conversations you're having with those leading organizations, Michael?
Yeah, great question, Mark. I'm going to be a little counterintuitive and provocative again, so I'm so glad you framed that up at the beginning. I have found, I'm going to back this up with some research we do, which I won't kind of talk to, because it very quickly could be in positioning, and I don't want to do any positioning in this. But suffice to say, I've got kind of 30,000 case studies I'm referring to when I talk about what I'm about to talk about. I found that the emphasis on purpose actually can lead you, or maybe even mislead you, into a selfish expression of yourself. Whereas what I've found with individuals that think about service rather than purpose. So during COVID, I'm with the interactions we were having in fairly deep conversations with individuals, some of whom, by the way, are on this call. So they know exactly kind of what I'm sort of referring to here is that there's a difference between having a sense of purpose and being of service. So if I were to use a horrible, extreme example, which is what I like to do, just to kind of provoke, Hitler had purpose, but you could question who the service was for. And so I think purpose can be a dual-edged sword. It can serve our ego, it can serve our neediness, it can serve our, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, by the way, right? So I've put Hitler out as an extreme example, but it can be. I've got a family member at the moment doing quite a lot of supportive work for them and just going through quite a challenging time, and we're using purpose as the vehicle to help recovery around that. And there will come a point where that purpose then needs to switch from purpose into service. If they want to truly experience what they're suggesting they want to experience, purpose is a really, really powerful motivator. It's like an initiator. It gets you out of the sprinting blocks at the start of the race, but it usually is not strong enough to maintain the momentum that is required because of circumstances changing. So you can still be of service to people no matter what the circumstances are, but sometimes purpose is less purposeful when the context shifts around you. So I've noticed, Mark, that people that kind of came out of COVID just reorientating themselves towards serving others tended to elevate, if you talk about your vertical development, quite remarkably in ways that maybe weren't present for them before, as opposed to those that came out with purpose. Like I see, purpose can often be a horizontal linear journey from here to there, from this to that, whereas service is nearly always experienced as a vertical transcendence. So I see purpose is like transport, like from here to there, and vertical is transcend, which is, it's literally I am no longer that doing this, which I get how kind of subtle that can sound, but it's back into that sense of self has just changed beyond recognition when you move from purpose to service. And so you sort of alluded to some of the clients I'm working with at the moment, and this has all emerged even within the last 18 months, where I'm suddenly getting inquiries at this level of conversation with leadership teams that I'm working with, where they're just going, we've been doing this for a while now, right? I've been in business for 30, 40 years as senior leaders. I don't want to replicate what I came through. I don't know what to deliver as an alternative because I don't know what the future holds. So where does that leave us? And of course, where it leaves you is you now here, right? So if you're not don't want to replicate the past and you've got no way of accurately predicting the future, what you're left with is the perfect now as the starting place. And so that's kind of unlocked some really amazing deep, and I mean some of the deepest level conversations I've ever had with business people in my whole career, where they're really genuinely curious about what is this actually all about? What's going on here, and what is the opportunity here if we kind of really ask some bold questions or creative questions, or dare I say it, deeper questions of ourselves.
Michael, I'm fascinated by this, and there's a couple different questions I would love to ask. One is around personal values versus organizational values. So I'm interested in that as you talk about, am I here to fulfill my own purpose, or am I of service to others? My other question, maybe I'll pose both. You pick the one you want to answer. The other one that I'm curious about is, well, okay, I'm more curious about the values one.
All right. Corey, just thank you so much. And I've just got to acknowledge them because they're very, very special people in my life, and they're on this call. Carmel, Lucy, and Matt, when you talked about personal values, all lit up, big smiles, nodded their head knowingly, because, and this is a compliment to you, Corey, that's the starting place. Like the 30,000 case studies I was referring to earlier that, again, didn't want to get into, is helping people clarify their deepest personal values. So once you tap into that, those values become the signposts, if you like, for what is sitting behind the choice of the selection of those values. Which is, I'm just going to say that again because it's a little bit vague. So once we nominate a set of values as our core values, what values do, which is miraculous in so many different ways, it's like mind-blowing. They reverse lens themselves on you. So we often think about, and to your point, Corey, organizations love taking values and converting them into behaviors, right? All right, so we value integrity, and therefore we will behave like this, like this, like this, which is taking the meaning and turning it into mechanics. So values by definition and are meaning and motivating. So that values provide meaning and motivation. They don't describe or prescribe behavior. That's ethics or morals. So if you clarify your values, have a look at them, particularly the top 5. So there's a subcluster of about, for most people, about 15, but the top 5 are like giant flashing neon signs, right, as to who's sitting behind the choice of these 5 values. And so that's a very, very powerful door that any one of us has access to kind of knock on, have that door open. And then once that door opens, you start to give yourself permission. And listen to that word, per the mission, right? So again, not purpose, what mission am I on? What mission am I here to serve? It starts to provide you with the language to understand the instinctive kind of calling or attractor field markers you alluded to earlier that is actually sitting behind, which again is occurring in the context of a level of culture. Patrick, sorry, I'm over talking yet again. You're on mute. We're missing your words of wisdom, Patrick. You're on mute.
Thank you. Well, yes, that's known as an operator error. Really, really familiar with them. So let's say I agree. So being conscious of and being able to articulate the values I have is very useful. But given what you said to Corey, then what do I do with that if it seems not that effective to sort of translate, oh, behavior. She can see me do this. He can see me do that. What's the way forward with the recognition of those values in terms of utilization on a day-to-day basis?
Amazing question. I've seen, for those of you who don't know Carmel White on the screen here, she was just applauding that question, Patrick, and I completely, I was applauding Carmel for applauding the question. Carmel's a bit of a super coach, so questioning is a PhD gift to the world. So when she hears questions like that, you really know you're onto something. I guess what I would say, Patrick, is what you just described again, and this is back to what you were asking about, Corey, is organizational values tend to be turned into effectiveness with an E, right? Which is great. What do we do with that? How do we do integrity? How do we do respect? How do we do customer service? So it immediately drags us away from the intent, the inspiration, the motivation, the profound meaning. So in other words, what I'm speaking to here, it takes us out of the subjective experience, drags us into the objective measurables of what would I see you do if you were being effective with that value. What we
so that sub-optimizes it, yes.
100%.
Right.
100%, yeah. So the way I describe it, Patrick, is the moment you do that, you violate values. It's a category error.
But there's got to be some place in between to, like, if this is values and this is behavior, and you're saying, well, no, that because that's problematic. There has to be something that would be useful for me, that would motivate me, that would turn me on, that would inspire me by being conscious of my values. So I'm looking for some language there.
Yeah. So you just nailed it. You just nailed it. When you said conscious of my values, if you can, so I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, I may have absolutely misheard how you language this, but I'm not
sure I'd know, but go ahead.
Okay, all right. the way you described was the effective and what do I do? And this is the difference between linear and non-linear. So values absolutely sit in the construct of non-linear. You don't do anything with values apart from be conscious of them and immerse yourself into the subjective experience of when you put your attention on that value, who do you become in that instant? Not what do you do, who do you become? And so we talk about the distinction between affect and effect. So when you put your consciousness, as you just beautifully put, when I put my consciousness on my core value, so of those 5, one of them is the core value. When I put my consciousness on that, it affects everything about me. In other words, the version of Michael Henderson that shows up in this moment transcends what would have been available if I hadn't had the awareness to hold that as a construct. So we talk about affectiveness put to effectiveness. So it's in really corny language, it's the being behind the doing.
Okay.
So, yeah. So what values do is highlight for you, and they're beautiful because they're like little pieces of a puzzle. So they don't give you the full answer, but they enable you to piece your own narrative, your own expression, your own meaning of them into a little narrative. So you can take your top 5 values and literally almost craft a sentence of narrative that's kind of declarative of what that level of consciousness expression is actually trying to be before it even does anything.
So, for example, let's say, can I continue with this? I'm trying.
Yeah, of course, 100%.
Well, I hope other people are okay with it too. I can get curious. So let's say you're my boss, and I've done something where I've got to figure out the budget for something, and I give you the numbers, and somewhere right before you're going to present it to others, I realize that I've screwed up, and I haven't calculated, and I go, oh, this is not such a good story as I originally told him. And so let's say I have a value about, I don't know if it's acting with integrity or speaking something. So I think about that, and I think about a way, if I'm tracking with you, and I think about the conditions, meaning what this would be like for you, what the impact would be like further organizationally. If that's percolating, I come up with a way to create the best possible impact on you and the organization. I speak to what needs to be spoken to about the error and its costs and consequences, but I'm thinking about how to present it to you. I'll say maybe in a way that I don't necessarily get fired. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but in a way that's going to have less negative repercussions, but also permits me to speak for my values. I think that's what I'm understanding you to suggest, but help me if I'm following you accurately or not.
Yeah, so if we just use that as a kind of working descriptive example for us all, what would be at play here from a values point of view? If I, as you said, I was your boss, so I'm assuming therefore, Patrick, I know you reasonably well, or I kind of know of you reasonably well is probably a better way of saying it. From a values point of view, and Corey, it'd be great to get your input here as well in terms of from a vertical leadership point of view, what the perspective is on this as well. From a values and anthropological point of view, Patrick, the first thing I would do if we were aware that you'd messed up or things hadn't, quite, first thing I'd do is kind of go to intent. So I'd go, based on what I know about Patrick, was there ill intent here? Is he out to sabotage and bring down the business? Right.
Okay.
And because you've been living, because we all live through our values, whether we know it or not, I would automatically go, well, of course not. It's Patrick, right? There's just no way he would do that. Is it possible Patrick's made a mistake? Yes. Is it possible Patrick was under so much pressure or so much excitement about these numbers that he kind of rushed a little bit in his enthusiasm and messed up? So that's the difference. Is the affect is who is Patrick? What is his intent? Where's he coming from? What level? And I'm going to talk about what calibration of consciousness does Patrick occupy? And then how does he behave from that. And if he happens to behave by having made a mistake or got some numbers wrong, then we can forgive instantly. Right? We can postpone the meeting. We can have it again in 2 days' time when you've had a chance to get back and recalibrate the numbers. So it's just making that distinction between what is on offer from this human being and how has it been expressed. And like that applies as much to customer service as well as interpersonal relationships in the business. Corey, have you got any thoughts? I'm just kind of, this, it almost feels like we're just speaking into.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a couple, and then I do want to take it to Suzanne's question. So the first one is, even, Patrick, in that situation, there are people who would say, look, I'm coming at this from an expert mindset. I don't even want to admit the mistake, right? Like, what does that say about me? And then for the leader, again, as Michael talked through, like how they're thinking about, what do I know about this person, and not what does this mean about me that I was about to present numbers that were wrong. So again, just thinking about the value of thinking through how you think about this, not just, what you're thinking about it. Okay, super fast. And Suzanne's question. Suzanne, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I was just reflecting, Michael, as you were talking, and this is probably 5 minutes back in the conversation, but lots of organizations are describing values as behaviors because they want to kind of measure how people are performing against them in a performance conversation. So I'm just curious, I often hear in organizations, a leader will say, gosh, that person's not very aligned to our values. I need to have a conversation with them, right? So they like to have those behaviors as tangible supports in those conversations. So I'm just wondering, what is the way forward for organizations who want to be values driven and who want to support their people to be aligned to their values?
Yeah, great questions, and thank you. I got a couple of responses, if that's okay, to this, because there's such a powerful question. There's a number of different elements that would be worthy to speak to. So I'll try and, these are going to sound almost like bullet points, Suzanne, so apologize if I don't unpack them all deeply enough. And if there's any that you want to go back to, just interrupt me immediately and ask. So first of all, there's a very, very strong argument to say that organizations don't have values, only human beings do. Because they're not philosophy, they're neurological pathways. So if your business doesn't have a neurological pathway, it's unlikely it's operating on values. It could well be operating on morals, principles, or ethics, and they're all valid choices. But the way values actually function is they are a subjective experience. So that's point one. When obviously, you can probably imagine there's a bit in that already. When organizations take a set of values, to your point, and define them as behaviors, they're doing that because of the Industrial Revolution mindset, where human beings are just machines. We want the machine to run well so that it's effective, productive, profitable, and therefore we will call an individual widget aside, called Bob, when he feels like he's misaligned with the organization's process, and we will have a conversation with Bob. The problem with describing a set of values is you take agency away from the individual. So I'm absolutely almost bullish with my clients that are willing to listen to me, and not all of them are, by the way, so just want to be clear on that as well. In fact, most of them probably aren't. I think you run a real risk of getting a diminishing return out of your organizational values when you describe them as behaviors, because what you're actually saying is, instead of saying, imagine if we did this, Suzanne, where I said to you, so Suzanne, one of our company values, as you know, is respect. When you think about what respect means to you in your world and in your life and in your sense of self and in your expression of who you are, what becomes possible? What do you imagine? What would you hold yourself to? What inspiration does that give you? Where does that take you? Where does that lift your performance to if you're doing everything you do with respect? Do you get how you responding to that, Suzanne, may give me a far more powerful level of performance descriptors than what the organization's come up with to get a linear, measurable, right? So I'd rather have the conversation where I go run a little experiment on Suzanne Cross for the next kind of 30 days, playing with the concept of respect as a performance motivator, a job fulfillment and satisfaction, and report back and tell me, how did it go? So I think organizations are doing themselves and their people a massive disservice by taking the value and telling the individuals what that value means as behaviors. It's almost like we're putting a ceiling on what's possible, whereas it's much better to actually go forth, choose one of the values or some of the values, and really, really tune to them, really let them speak to you and inspire you, and surprise yourself with what becomes possible when you run on that fuel, right? When you have that vitamin C running through your system for 30 days, what becomes possible? And I just keep watching organizations take organizational values going, wow, what are you doing? They're like a superpower, and you've just deprived everybody of accessing them. And then the final point is all the data, and I've written a whole book on this because I couldn't believe the data myself, even as an anthropologist, going, that can't be true. So we went and replicated the research. All the data shows us that organizational values make zero, in fact, minus 0.2% negative impact on people's level of commitment and loyalty to their role and the business, compared to knowing their personal values, which can give you anywhere between, it used to be a 17 to 20% increase in commitment and loyalty to the business. Post-COVID, back to your earlier question, Mark, when people kind of had a chance to really reflect on who am I, what's going on, we found, listen to this, we found it jumped from 17% to 72% impact. So we had this quantum leap in impact, people going, wow, if I could really embody my own values through my work and still be in alignment to the business strategy, governance, the laws of the land, etc. Right now I'm cooking with gas. And if you remember what I think everyone was calling it, some people in culture, Lucy may be able to correct me, was it the Great Resignation it was referred to? Right? That was what was sitting behind it, was people going, why am I playing my role in the company through their rules of engagement when I'm an independent agent human being that is not motivated by that expression of this? I want to do it this way. And so hence they working from home gave them that permission to do that, becoming self-employed, or consulting into multiple organizations where you just literally. So it's a great question, Suzanne. I almost think that's a really powerful starting point for consciousness, for leadership, because again, personal values are the agency of personal leadership. Right? You can't lead yourself if you're not living your own values, right? So there's a lot in what you've just asked there, Suzanne. So good for you.
It's like a cliffhanger. This is like Batman and Robin. Pow moment again. Will the rock land on? You can see why we did part 1, part 2, part 3, and this might go on forever. Mindful of time, we're just over. I'm also mindful of just an exceptional conversation. Our intention for these is to attract phenomenal guests and exceptional audiences. I think you'll agree we've done that together, which has been an amazing community to be part of. I'll put a little note in the chat. There's another subset of the community coming together in San Fran to bounce ideas around how to shape and design leadership development, leveraging vertical development principles. So how might you shape and design it? And yeah, I'll be also intentional about attracting a great guest for the next session that's coming up, as always, in a month's time. For now, a huge thank you, Michael, for your time, your intention, and all of you for bringing your focus to the session. Go well, fly well, enjoy life, and connecting on your values. They matter. Catch you soon, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, team.
Thank you so much, everyone. Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Corey.
Sorry, I'm mute myself. Thank you all.
Operator error, as Patrick said earlier, right?
Yeah, wasn't that a great? That was my favorite line from the whole talk. I'm going to write that down. Operator error. You're on mute, Patrick.
So I'm still here. Can I say something?
Of course, please do, my friend. Please do.
Sure.